Hi, thanks so much for tuning in. You're watching BQ Prime. My name is Alex Mathew. Now, over the past couple of days, we've been speaking to a few companies to understand the pulse of the Indian consumer, trying to understand what the trends are right now, giving everything that has been happening, announcements of possible disruption to monsoons, what the impact of that will be on rural activity, the potential slowdown in consumption trends in certain segments in the urban side as well. Joining me now is the Chief Executive Officer of Crompton Greaves Consumer Electricals. We've got Mathew Job who's joining. And Mathew, thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
And I'm right at the onset. I want to understand. I would assume that ceiling fans in particular, won't really be impacted by consumer sentiment because essentially to life in general here, right? But I'm still trying to understand in the segments that you operate in, what are the signs that you're seeing in consumer sentiment, consumer behavior? Are you seeing sluggishness at all?
Yeah, I would say in the last, at least in the last six months or so, we have definitely been seeing some sluggishness in consumer demand. And it's across categories. While some categories may be more or less impacted, I would say overall, if I look at an overall consumer electrical industry, I definitely think that there has been some consumer demand sluggishness over the last 6 months. I mean, there could be various reasons for it. One is, of course, the fact that most of the categories that we play in has seen significant inflation, in terms of cost and also consequently in terms of price. In the last year and a half, typically, in this kind of industry, that the average price inflation would be 3 to 5% on a normal year. But if I look at the last year and a half, it's been talking at almost 20% in terms of price. Actually, the cost side inflation is even higher. So to that extent, I would think that, when you have that kind of inflation on a sustained basis, there is definitely going to be an adverse impact on consumer demand. Now, going forward, how do we see this? Is very difficult to predict, but at least for us, in terms of, we have a strong, seasonal demand during summer, at least for fans and pumps. And as you're already aware, we also had a change in standards, at least for fans, from the 1st of January, which obviously, means that there has been a further price increase, which is passed because of the change in specifications. But the unfortunate part is, even as we speak today, we see further, strengthening of commodity costs. So the unfortunate part is that, while we have had steep commodity-led price inflation, unfortunately, I don't think that is fully behind us. How that would get impacted by the weather, we don't know, because the prediction has been for a tough and hot summer. But if that were to play out, you could have some positive impact, at least for the summer season. However, if monsoons were to play through and thereafter, there could be again a negative impact, overall as an economy, and then thereafter on consumer goods. Yeah.
If you can break it up for us, though, because we're trying to understand the objective of this conversation is to try and understand the current trends. And if you can break it up for us within the urban centers that you operate in and in the rural space, what are the signs that you're seeing in these two separate markets?
I would say, for us, our exposure to real rural is very limited. Okay, we are still, most of our business, I think, more than 90% or 95% of our business actually happens in urban areas. To that extent, we don't have that much exposure to rural and have really not impacted so much by the rural, fluctuation in terms of demand. However, I would say, even if I look at semi-rural markets, because of the fact that we are only growing our distribution there, we are not really getting impacted yet by any sluggishness that might be playing out there. All the comments I made are primarily related to what we see in our markets, which is primarily urban.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Now, if you can break it up further for us, and I remember we spoke not too long back when you talked about the increase in prices, you were absorbing a certain amount of that so that you wouldn't shock the market.
Yeah.
Will you have to do that in other product categories as well?
Yes, it's happening as we speak. As we speak, for example, even if I were to remove the impact, say, of the star rating upgrade on fans, I think that based on pure commodity alone, there is another, what I see compared to December, if I look at March, there is another, say, 5 to 6% further inflation in terms of cost side, merely on account of commodities that is playing out primarily across our fans and pump segments, because that is where a lot of the metal related commodity cost impact is. And, if you ask me how much we really passed, we have passed, less than half of the commodity-led inflation in this period. So, and this is on top of the fact that there is already a backlog, which happened over the last 18 months, which is why I said that the commodity, cost inflation cycle is not fully played out. We thought, at least towards the fag end of the last calendar year, we thought that things were beginning to soften a little bit, and we thought that we would get some kind of a breather, but that has not been the case. Right from January again, we start to see, many of the commodities start getting more pricey. So unfortunately, at this moment, we are not, again, it's definitely impossible to pass all that to the consumer, who is already, feeling the brunt of the multiple price increases that have happened in our categories and other categories in the recent past. Yeah.
So therefore, from that perspective, and you spoke a little bit about the consumption trends that you're witnessing, there is that cost pressure. You're trying to absorb as much as possible, but there's still that cost pressure. Yes. You will, I guess, to a certain extent, have to pass some of that on in the coming quarter. And so therefore, assuming that on the other side, where you're talking about infrastructure, you're talking about construction activity, hopefully everything that the government has talked about pans out, do you at least see some increase in demand from that side if construction activity picks up?
See, most of our business is primarily B2C, okay? And, even within B2C, I would say, the kind of products that we deal in, which are primarily, fans, lighting, and so on and so forth, tends to play out towards the later part of a construction boom. So if you were to see, for example, categories like cables and wires tend to get the benefit first when the construction starts to pick up, because those have to go into the, into the walls, just so to speak. While the products we sell actually get bought once people have started moving into the homes.
True.
So to that extent, it takes a little longer to come in. But if I were to look back at the last few months and see at least the results of companies who sell, switches and cables and so on and so forth, there is some reason to feel optimistic that the demand could start to improve. May not be in the immediate quarter, but in the next few quarters, because a lot of our products have a strong link to people moving into new homes. So we do expect that and hope that, maybe in the next few quarters, we should start to see some positive signs again.
Now, before I get to my correlated question, I do want to follow up on the input costs. You mentioned that input costs, you're seeing them go up. And there is some commentary, Mathew, where people are saying, at least in the second half of CY23, you could see some easing of pressure on the inputs. Is that something at all that you're focused on, or is it too early to tell?
It's too early to say because, as I mentioned, towards, I would say July-September period last year, of the last calendar year, we thought that commodities started to ease and things would get better and that the worst was behind us. And it lasted for a couple of months, the softening. And before we knew it, was again starting to go up again. So I would be wary of making too long-term forecasts because we have never had, I think, at least in recent history, we have never had such a long period of sustained cost increase on the commodity side. So I would be wary of making any prediction how these would shape up going forward.
Give us the outlook on pricing then, because you mentioned that you are bearing the cost of increased, both in terms of commodities and also the change in rating scale. It's going to be a challenging environment. What is the pricing strategy, and therefore, what are the implications for margins?
See, at least from a company perspective, I think we've, at least in the near term, we feel it's very important that we protect our market share. Okay.
Sure.
In the past, I think we have probably tried to be much more, much more careful on margins in terms of holding the margins. But I think at least given the current demand scenario, the way things are panning out, I think it's very important, especially in the categories like fans, where we have a new range of fans that have been launched, that we remain absolutely sure that we protect our shares. Because I'm very confident that when the demand comes back, and hopefully the cost side will hopefully start to ease at some point of time, the margins will come back pretty quickly. But to gain back any substantial loss of share, which if you were to give that up, it's going to be much more difficult. So I think we are very clear that in the short term, irrespective of what it takes, we will be very, we will be playing very carefully to ensure that we retain our market shares and don't let that suffer on account of any short-term movements of competitive price points. Yeah.
Finally, on the demand scenario, you've more or less covered the aspect of your expectations, but I'm just trying to understand what the flow through will be on the volumes in the different categories that you play in. Do you at least expect that the new financial year you'll be at par, or do you think that you'll better it?
See, in terms of I think across the industry, in terms of volume, volumes have taken a hit in the last, I would say, 6 to 9 months. It may be even a little longer. Maybe in the early period, that didn't really show up in the numbers of the companies because the price increase more than offset the volume decrease. While in the later part of this financial year, that trend has become a little more, difficult to maintain because, you cannot keep, the price increases keep getting slowed down over time, but the volume decrease is still very strong. Going forward, I think our immediate, objective is to ensure that we are able to arrest the volume decline that has been happening in the last few quarters. And then I think that will be good enough to maintain or improve shares. But we definitely don't want any further erosion in terms of volumes.
Does interest rate scenario at all affect your demand, and therefore, if it turns, will that lead to a tailwind?
I would say yes, with some lag, like I mentioned, because definitely when interest rates get cheaper in India, still a lot of people depend on home loans to buy homes. Okay, now as the interest rates would get lower, I think there will be a greater, greater chance that people will start buying and getting into homes.
Yeah.
At that point of time, with some lag, as people start getting into homes or even doing renovation and so on and so forth, we will start to see demand pick up. So then that is what we are thinking of.
How much? So here you're talking about ceiling fans, but how much of this is just to understand and to elucidate this point further? How much of your volumes is replacement, and how much of it is actual sales, first time sales?
I would say, I would separate out the replacement demand. I think would be anywhere in the vicinity of 20 to 30%. Okay. And 70%, is a combination of new housing, new points, and renovation. And the reason I club those is because when you renovate the home, you basically, you start behaving as if it is a completely new point. So, but 70% is falls in that bucket. Yeah.
No, that more or less clears things up. Thank you, Mathew, for what has been an insightful conversation. Right. Thank you so much for taking the time. And to everybody joining in, thanks so much for tuning in.
Thank you. Bye-bye.